I am Joshua, 25, and my parents abandoned me in a hospital room right after a life-saving emergency surgery, just so they wouldn't miss my younger brother's high school football game. Before I tell you about the explosive moment my boss put them in their place and destroyed their sense of entitlement forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I woke up to the rhythmic, piercing beep of a heart monitor. That was the first thing that registered. The second was the agonizing, scraping sensation in my throat. I tried to swallow, but I couldn't. Panic flared in my chest. I tried to open my mouth, to cough, to scream, but something thick and rigid was jammed down my airway. It was a breathing tube. The machine next to me hissed and clicked, forcing air into my lungs. My arms felt like they were weighed down by lead. A dull, throbbing fire burned across my abdomen. I had just survived an emergency appendectomy. The surgeon would later tell me that my appendix had completely ruptured while I was pulling a double shift at the veterinary clinic. If I had waited even one more hour to drive myself to the emergency room, the infection would have killed me. I forced my heavy eyelids open. The harsh, blinding glare of the fluorescent hospital lights made my eyes water. As my vision slowly came into focus, I saw two familiar figures standing at the foot of my bed. My parents, Robert and Martha. For a brief, naive fraction of a second, my heart swelled. A profound sense of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. I had almost died on that operating table, but my parents were here. They had rushed to my side. They actually cared. Then my vision cleared completely. I saw my mother buttoning up her expensive wool trench coat. She wasn't looking at the monitors keeping me alive. She wasn't looking at the 4 bags dripping fluids into my veins. She was staring at her watch, her jaw tight with irritation. She glanced up and noticed my eyes were open. Her expression didn't soften. There were no tears of relief, no frantic rushing to my side to hold my hand. "Oh, good, you're awake," Mom said. Her tone was entirely casual. She sounded like she was commenting on the weather, or noting that I had finally woken up from a lazy Sunday nap. "We have to get going. Caleb's team made the playoffs. This is a huge game for him. This could be his shot at a scholarship. You understand." I stared at her. I literally could not speak. The plastic tube taped to my face and shoved down my vocal cords made sure of that. I lay there, my body broken, my vitals still unstable, listening to my own mother prioritize a high school football game over my survival. My dad stepped forward. He didn't ask the nursing staff about my prognosis. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He just reached out and patted my right hand, the one that didn't have a needle buried in the vein. "We'll check on you later," Dad said, offering a tight, forced smile. "Be a good brother, Joshua. Don't make a fuss today. A good brother." That was my entire identity to them. A supporting character, a stepping stone. I blinked once. Yes, it was the absolute only physical movement my exhausted body could manage. They turned around, their shoes squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room clicked shut behind them. They didn't look back. Not once. The silence that settled into the room was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. I lay there, staring up at the acoustic ceiling tiles, counting the little perforations in the foam just to keep my mind from shattering. A tear slipped out of the corner of my right eye. It was hot and stinging, trailing down my temple and pooling in my ear. Then another followed, and another. I couldn't lift my arms to wipe them away. I couldn't sob out loud to release the pressure building in my chest. I was trapped inside my own failing body, completely and utterly abandoned. About an hour later, the door handle clicked. A nurse named Matthew walked in. He was a tall, broad-shouldered guy with kind, exhausted eyes. He walked over to the machines, checked my vitals, and jotted something down on his electronic tablet. Then he looked down at my face. He stopped writing. He saw the wet tracks glistening on my cheeks. He saw the sheer, unadulterated devastation in my eyes. Matthew looked around the sterile, empty room. The visitor chairs were pushed neatly into the corner. "Where is your family, man?" he asked gently. I weakly lifted my hand, pointing a trembling finger to the plastic tube in my throat, then mimed writing on my palm. Matthew understood immediately. He walked over to the supply counter, grabbed a small whiteboard and a black dry erase marker, and placed them gently on my chest. My hand shook so violently I could barely uncap the marker. I dragged the tip across the slick surface, forming messy, jagged letters. Brother's game. Matthew stared at the words. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck jumped. He went through a rapid succession of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, disgust, before finally settling his features back into a mask of professional neutrality. Are they coming back tonight? Matthew asked, his voice low. I dragged the eraser across the board. I wrote again. Depends on if they win. Matthew didn't laugh. He didn't offer me any of the standard, empty hospital platitudes. He didn't say, I'm sure they love you, or, they probably just didn't realize how serious it was. He knew better. Instead, he walked over to the corner, grabbed the heavy plastic visitor's chair, dragged it right next to the railing of my bed, and sat down. My shift ends in 6 hours, Matthew said, leaning back and crossing his arms. I'll stay right here with you until then. That small, simple act of human decency broke something deep inside me. I cried harder, my chest heaving against the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. I grabbed the marker and scribbled frantically, my handwriting barely legible. You don't have to. I'm used to it. Matthew read the board. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, bringing his face closer to mine. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression fiercely serious. That, Joshua, is exactly why I have to. Lying there, with a total stranger showing me more compassion in 10 minutes than my own flesh and blood had shown me in 25 years. A switch flipped in my brain. The sad, desperate kid who always waited by the phone for a crumb of affection died on that hospital bed. I wiped the whiteboard clean. I didn't know the exact logistics yet, but I knew my life was about to drastically change. I closed my eyes, the beeping of the monitor fading into the background. They had no idea what I was about to do. The next 48 hours in the hospital were a brutal, agonizing masterclass in isolation. They removed the breathing tube on the second morning, which felt like pulling a jagged sword out of my throat. My voice was nothing but a raw, painful rasp. Every time I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway, my heart did a stupid, involuntary little jump. A pathetic part of me still hoped the door would swing open and my parents would rush in, apologizing profusely, realizing they had made a terrible mistake. But it was never them. It was always a doctor, or the food service worker dropping off a tray of lukewarm chicken broth, or Dylan, the hospital billing administrator. Dylan walked in on the afternoon of the second day, carrying a thick clipboard and looking terribly inconvenienced. Mr. Miller, Dylan said, tapping his pen against his thigh. We need an emergency contact or a financial guarantor to sign these final insurance forms. Your parents were supposed to handle the paperwork before you went into surgery, but the front desk said they left in a hurry. Can you call them? I slowly shook my head. The friction against my pillows sent a jolt of pain through my stomach. They're busy. Give me the pen. Dylan raised an eyebrow, looking at my pale, sweaty face. Are you sure? You're heavily medicated, man. Give it to me. I rasped, my voice cracking. I took the heavy clipboard and signed my own name on the dotted lines. My signature was shaky, but the ink was permanent. I was entirely responsible for my own life, my own medical debt, my own survival. Just like always. Once Dylan left the room, I reached over to the bedside table and grabbed my cell phone. The screen lit up. I had 3 unread text messages. All of them were from my mother. I opened the thread, a bitter taste rising in the back of my throat. Message 1. Caleb made 2 touchdowns. We're going to the state finals. Message 2. So proud of your brother. The scouts are definitely watching. This is his year. Message 3. Don't forget to pay your portion of the family phone bill this month. I stared at the glowing screen. Not a single question about whether I had survived the night. Not a single inquiry about my pain levels, what the surgeon said, or if I needed a ride home upon discharge. I tossed the phone onto the thin hospital blanket. This wasn't a new pattern. I closed my eyes, and the memories flooded back with crystal clarity. I remembered sitting in the blazing heat of my high school graduation. I sat in the bleachers in my cheap, rented gown for 3 hours, scanning the massive crowd, waiting to see my parents wave. They never showed up. Caleb had a minor league baseball tryout that same afternoon across town. When I got home, they told me I was old enough to understand priorities. I remembered turning 18 and realizing I had to pay for my community college classes entirely on my own, taking out predatory student loans. The college fund they had promised to split evenly between us since childhood had mysteriously evaporated when Caleb needed elite private coaching. They treated that money like his inheritance, and I was just a squatter in their house. Speaking of money, the reality of my situation suddenly hit me. I had a massive medical deductible to cover. I grabbed my phone again to check my banking app. I had my own personal checking account for my salary at the vet clinic, but there was also an old joint savings account I had shared with my mom since I was a 16-year-old kid working double shifts at a local diner. I rarely touched it, treating it as my ultimate emergency safety net. I knew there was exactly $8,000 sitting in it. It was my financial lifeline. I tapped the banking icon. The screen loaded. Available balance, $12.50. My heart slammed violently against my ribs. My breath hitched in my damaged throat. I hit refresh. Available balance, $12.50. I clicked on the transaction history, my thumb trembling. There it was. Exactly 3 months ago, a single massive withdrawal of $7,987.50 was executed. Authorized by Martha Miller. My own mother had drained my emergency savings. I felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly, a combination of the heavy painkillers and the sheer, sickening shock of betrayal. Why? What could she possibly need $8,000 in cash for without telling me? A dark suspicion crept into my mind. I opened the Facebook app. I hated social media, but my mom documented her entire life on it. I scrolled down her timeline, past the endless posts bragging about Caleb's athletic stats. I stopped on a post from exactly 3 months ago. The image loaded. It was Caleb, my 18-year-old golden child brother. He was wearing his varsity jacket, leaning casually against the hood of a gleaming midnight blue Porsche. He was grinning from ear to ear, dangling a set of keys toward the camera. The caption below the photo read, "An early championship gift for our superstar. He deserves the absolute world. We are so proud to invest in his future. Hard work pays off." I stared at the bright screen until my vision blurred with angry tears. They stole my money. They drained the savings I bled for, the money I saved by eating ramen noodles and skipping vacations, just to buy a spoiled teenager a luxury sports car. I gripped the edges of my phone so hard my knuckles turned a bruised shade of white. My jaw locked tight, my teeth grinding together. A thick blue vein throbbed painfully at my temple. I felt completely violated. Used. Discarded. I wasn't their son. I was an ATM machine that they occasionally remembered to plug in. Right at that exact moment, the heavy wooden door of the hospital room swung open. "Well, look who's looking a bit more lively." My dad's loud, booming voice echoed across the sterile room. I slowly turned my head. It was day 3. Robert and Martha finally walked in. Mom was clutching a pathetic, plastic-wrapped bouquet of yellow carnations, clearly purchased as an afterthought from the hospital gift shop downstairs. Caleb, of course, was nowhere to be seen. I didn't say a single word. I just locked the screen of my phone, slid it under my pillow, and stared at them. The storm was here. Mom set the cheap, crinkling flowers down on the rolling tray table, brushing her hands together like she was dusting off dirt. "How are you feeling, Joshua?" she asked. She didn't sit in the chair. She hovered near the doorway, her designer purse still slung tightly over her shoulder, her body language screaming that she wanted to be literally anywhere else. Like I had my organs sliced open, pumped full of antibiotics, and left to rot, I said. My voice was a harsh rasp, but the cold fury anchoring it made it perfectly steady. Dad frowned deeply, crossing his thick arms over his chest. Don't be so dramatic. We weren't gone that long. Besides, Caleb's team won the game. They're going straight to the state championship. You should be happy for your brother instead of wallowing in self-pity. I have been trapped in this bed for 72 hours, I said flatly, my eyes drilling into his. My appendix ruptured. I could have died from sepsis while you were doing the wave in the bleachers. But you didn't die, Mom snapped back, rolling her eyes in exasperation. You are perfectly fine now. The doctors here are highly trained professionals. We had to celebrate with the team, Joshua. You know how important this momentum is for Caleb's future, right? Caleb's future, I muttered. I reached over and pressed the hard plastic button on the bed rail. The electric motor whirred as the top half of my bed raised up, forcing me into a sitting position. The fresh incision across my stomach burned like hot iron, but I ignored it. I needed to look them directly in the eye for this. What about my future, Mom? What about my salary savings? Mom froze. Her entire body went rigid. Her eyes darted frantically to Dad for a split second before she plastered a fake look of confusion on her face. What on earth are you talking about? The joint savings account, I said, my voice dropping an octave. The $8,000 I saved from working every terrible shift since I was 16. Where is it? Dad cleared his throat, puffing out his chest to make himself look bigger. We had to borrow it. We are your parents, Joshua. We put a roof over your head and fed you for 18 years. We needed to put a substantial down payment on a reliable vehicle for your brother. A Porsche is not a reliable vehicle, Dad. It is a luxury sports car. I yelled, the volume tearing at my raw throat. You stole my money to buy a teenager a status symbol, while I am sitting here right now trying to figure out how to pay an emergency hospital deductible. Stop yelling, Mom hissed, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger at my face. You are acting like a petulant, jealous child. It is an investment in his athletic image. College scouts look at these things. You have a job. You make a salary. You can just earn it back. I am a veterinary surgical assistant. I make a modest living, not a fortune. And you didn't even have the basic decency to ask me. I gripped the metal bed rails, my entire body shaking with a toxic mix of adrenaline and physical pain. You didn't text me a single time to see if I survived the anesthesia. But I know for a fact you texted Caleb's coach 17 times. I know because you accidentally included my old number in the team group chat. That is completely different, Dad said dismissively, waving his hand in the air. Caleb is under a lot of pressure. He needs us right now. I needed you, I screamed, the pain in my stomach ripping, but I couldn't stop the words from pouring out. I was choking on a plastic tube. I was terrified. I was alone, and you just walked away. Just then, the sharp, obnoxious buzz of a cell phone cut through the heavy, tense air in the room. Mom looked down at the screen of her phone. Her hard, angry face instantly softened into a look of absolute devotion. Oh, Caleb needs his special protein powder for practice, she murmured almost to herself. He forgot to order it online. She looked up at me, then glanced quickly at the door. She actually took a physical step backward. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It hurt my stitches terribly, but I laughed anyway. Go, I told her, my voice dripping with pure venom. Joshua, please don't be like this, she said, her hand already turning the cold metal doorknob. We will come back later this evening when you've calmed down from this little tantrum. This isn't a tantrum, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy calm. This is goodbye. Get out. Dad scoffed loudly, shaking his head in disgust. You're punishing us for supporting your brother's dreams. You'll get over it. You always do. They walked out. Again. I didn't cry this time. The sadness was completely gone, evaporated and replaced by a cold, sharp, brilliant clarity. I reached under my hospital pillow, grabbed my phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Dr. Lincoln," I said the second he answered. He was the brilliant veterinarian and owner of the clinic where I worked, a stern but deeply fair man who had taken me under his wing. "Joshua? Good Lord, son, we've been worried sick. The hospital administration called us to verify your employment insurance. How are you holding up?" "I'm alive, sir," I said, staring at the empty doorway. "Listen, a few months ago you mentioned you were opening a new partner clinic up in Seattle. You asked if I wanted to transfer." "I did," Dr. Lincoln said slowly, his tone cautious. "But I thought you wanted to stay close to your family." "Things changed," I said. "Is the position still open? For my best surgical assistant?" "Always. But Joshua, you just had major surgery. You need a safe place to recover." "That's exactly why I need to leave immediately. I need a place to recover that isn't here. I need to disappear." There was a brief, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Dr. Lincoln was an incredibly sharp man. He didn't pry for the gory details. He just shifted into problem-solving mode. "I'll make the calls right now. You have company housing waiting for you in Seattle. When can you travel?" "The minute they discharge me." The next 48 hours were an absolute blur of calculated, secret, agonizing movements. The physical pain of the surgery was severe, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins masked the worst of it. I had a mission. From my hospital bed, I called my landlord and ruthlessly broke my month-to-month lease, sacrificing my security deposit without a second thought. Cameron, a younger guy I worked with at the clinic, had stopped by the hospital on his lunch break to drop off some get-well cards from the staff. He walked into my room right as I was hanging up the phone with the landlord. Cameron had unfortunately been standing in the hallway the day prior and overheard the tail end of the screaming match with my parents. He didn't ask a single probing question. He just looked at my pale face, looked at the packed duffel bag the nurses had helped me assemble, and said, "Give me your apartment keys. I'll rent a U-Haul tonight and pack your stuff." When the surgical team finally cleared me for discharge on Friday morning, I didn't have to call a cab. Dr. Lincoln himself pulled up to the main hospital entrance in his sleek black SUV. He had gone out of his way to line the entire passenger seat with soft, thick blankets and pillows to protect my fragile abdomen from the bumps in the road. He drove me all the way to Seattle, a grueling, rainy 4-hour drive, refusing to let me pay for the gas or the drive-through meals along the way. "You do not owe me an explanation for this, Joshua," Dr. Lincoln said, keeping his eyes fixed on the slick highway ahead. "But I want you to know that genuine talent and fierce loyalty mean something to me. You are going to do great things at the new clinic. Consider this a fresh start, a real promotion." Arriving in Seattle felt like stepping out of a suffocating box and breathing real air for the first time. The city smelled like wet pine needles and cold ocean salt. The apartment Dr. Lincoln had secured for me was small but incredibly cozy, located in a quiet neighborhood just 10 minutes walking distance from the massive new veterinary center. For the first 3 weeks, I focused entirely on 2 things: healing my body and burying myself in my work. I changed my phone number entirely. I didn't tell a single soul back in my hometown where I went, with one fatal exception: Wyatt. Wyatt and I had been best friends since middle school. I knew his parents had gone through a bitter divorce, which made him fiercely, sometimes blindly protective of the concept of keeping family together. He found me on Instagram and sent a frantic message one night. "Wyatt. Hey man, your parents are totally freaking out. They went to your apartment and some new couple lives there. Where the hell are you? Are you okay?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I was terribly lonely in a new, massive city. I just wanted to trust someone from my old life. So I made a massive mistake. "Joshua, I'm fine, Wyatt. I moved to Seattle. Got a new job. Please don't tell my parents. I need space from them. Wyatt." "Wow, Seattle. That's crazy far." "Don't worry, man. Your secret is totally safe with me. Just glad you're alive." I believed him. I threw myself into my new reality. My new coworkers, Joseph and David, were incredibly welcoming. They didn't know anything about my toxic family dynamic or the inheritance money that was stolen from me. They just knew me as the quiet, hyper-competent guy who never complained, who could calm down the most terrified, aggressive rescue dogs, and who assisted flawlessly in complex orthopedic surgeries. For the very first time in my adult life, I felt truly respected. I was earning a fantastic salary. I was building a solid foundation. Then, exactly 1 month after I moved, the storm finally caught up to me. It was a dreary, rainy Tuesday afternoon. The clinic lobby was relatively quiet, playing soft instrumental music. I was standing at the front reception desk, updating some digital patient files on the computer. Joseph was in the back surgical suite prepping a sterile tray for a dental cleaning. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive, violent knocking rattled the heavy glass front door of the clinic. I looked up from the monitor. My blood ran completely, terrifyingly cold. The digital tablet in my hand nearly slipped from my sweaty fingers and crashed onto the floor. Standing on the wet sidewalk, glaring fiercely through the rain-streaked glass, were my father, my mother, and my Uncle Gabriel, the family's designated peacekeeper, who always used guilt to manipulate everyone into submitting to Mom's insane demands. Wyatt, that absolute traitor. He had sold me out. My mother aggressively yanked the heavy door open, the little brass bell chiming cheerfully above her head, a sickening contrast to her furious face. She marched into the pristine, quiet lobby, her boots dripping dirty rainwater onto the spotless tile floor. She didn't look relieved to see that her son was alive and healthy. She looked murderous. Did you honestly think you could just pack up and run away from your obligations? Mom barked, her shrill voice echoing sharply against the clinic walls. I stood up slowly, stepping out from behind the safety of the reception desk. How exactly did you find me? Uncle Gabriel stepped forward, holding up his hands in a fake, patronizing, calming gesture. Joshua, settle down now. Your friend Wyatt was incredibly worried about you. He did the right thing by calling us. We are family. You can't just abandon your blood like this. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, my voice trembling with a potent mix of surging adrenaline and deep-seated rage. You abandoned me in a hospital bed with a tube down my throat. Oh, for God's sake, drop the victim act, Dad yelled, taking a heavy step toward me. We do not have the time or the patience for this pity party. We have a real, massive crisis on our hands back home, and you are going to fix it. I narrowed my eyes, standing my ground. What crisis? It's Caleb, Mom said, her face suddenly twisting into a panicked, desperate grimace. He had a terrible accident. He crashed the Porsche. I stood completely still, staring at them. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation almost made me burst out laughing. He crashed the car? Is he hurt? He's perfectly fine, just a bruised collarbone and a little scratch on his arm. Dad snapped impatiently, waving his hand. But the car is completely totaled. He wrapped the front end around an oak tree. And, well, he had a little alcohol in his system at the time. His insurance claim was completely denied. The loan company is coming after us for the remaining balance. It's over $40,000. I crossed my arms over my chest, digging my fingernails into my biceps. Sounds like a terrible financial problem for you and Caleb to figure out. Why are you here in Seattle? Uncle Gabriel put on his most serious, deeply disappointed face. He looked at me like I was a criminal. Joshua, please, they are your parents. They are facing total financial ruin. You make a good salary here. You clearly have good credit. We need you to take out a personal loan to cover the massive car debt. And we need you to help pay for Caleb's lawyer so he doesn't get a permanent criminal record. It's what families do. I was utterly speechless. The sheer, staggering audacity of these people standing in front of me. They stole my life savings, bought a luxury vehicle for the golden child, let him destroy it while driving drunk, and now they traveled across state lines to demand that I go into massive debt to hire a lawyer and clean up his mess. No, I said simply. The word felt incredibly powerful leaving my lips. Mom's face instantly turned a dark shade of purple. The facade of the worried mother vanished entirely. What do you mean, no? You selfish, ungrateful little brat. We gave you life. You owe us everything." She stepped aggressively closer, raising her finger and pointing it inches from my nose. "You listen to me very carefully. I don't care about your little feelings or your grudges. You will go to the bank tomorrow morning and sign those papers. If you don't, I will march right back in here, find your manager, and I will make such a massive, ugly scene that they will fire you on the spot. I'll tell them you steal controlled medications. I will ruin this little fantasy life of yours. Is there a problem out here in my lobby?" The deep, booming, authoritative voice cut through the tense air like a sharp knife. Dr. Lincoln stepped out of his corner office. He was wearing his crisp white lab coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck, and his face was set in absolute stone. He had heard every single word of the extortion attempt. Mom spun around, her face immediately transforming. She plastered on a fake, sickly sweet smile. "Oh, you must be the manager. Hello there. I am Joshua's mother. I'm so terribly sorry for the noise. We are just dealing with a very stubborn, disrespectful employee of yours. He needs a little reality check about family values." Dr. Lincoln walked slowly, deliberately to the front desk. He looked at my parents, then at Uncle Gabriel, assessing them with the kind of cold disgust usually reserved for parasites. "Ma'am," Dr. Lincoln said, his voice dangerously low and calm, "I am not the manager. I am the owner and founder of this entire clinic network." Dad puffed out his chest, trying to assert dominance. "Well, good. Then you should know your employee is refusing to help his family in a time of desperate financial need. It speaks volumes about his character." Dr. Lincoln let out a low, dry, humorless chuckle. He turned his gaze to me, then back to my parents. "You people seem to be operating under a massive, fundamental delusion. Joshua is not just an employee here." Mom frowned, her fake smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" "When Joshua transferred to Seattle," Dr. Lincoln said, his voice rising in volume, commanding the attention of the entire room, "he didn't just take a job. I recognized his unparalleled surgical talent, his flawless work ethic, and his integrity. Things that you clearly failed to see. I offered him a promotion, a very significant one." Dr. Lincoln walked over and placed a firm, supportive hand on my shoulder. I stood taller, my spine straightening. "Joshua is a junior partner at this practice," Dr. Lincoln announced, the words echoing off the tile walls like gunshots. "He legally owns 20% of this facility. He brings in more revenue in a single month than you probably see in an entire year. So, when you stand in my lobby and threaten to get him fired, you are threatening the co-owner of this hospital. And when you scream and attempt extortion on my property, you are committing a crime." The silence in the room was absolute, deafening perfection. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom's mouth hung open in grotesque shock. Dad's face drained of all color, going completely pale. Uncle Gabriel took a physical step backward, his eyes darting frantically between me and Dr. Lincoln, suddenly realizing the massive power dynamic shift. "Partner," Dad whispered, the word seemingly choking him. "That's right," I said, my voice strong, loud, and unwavering. I was no longer the scared, voiceless kid trapped in a hospital bed. "I built something real. While you were worshipping Caleb and draining my bank accounts, I built an empire. And you will never, ever get a single dime of it." Mom started stammering, her tone shifting violently from threatening to desperate. "Joshua, honey, please, we didn't know. If you have money, then surely you can help your brother out. Just this once." "David," Dr. Lincoln called out loudly toward the back surgical suite. "Call the police immediately. Tell them we have 3 aggressive trespassers attempting financial extortion in our lobby." "You wouldn't dare," Dad yelled, panic creeping into his eyes. "Watch me," I said, crossing my arms and staring him down. They panicked, realizing they had absolutely zero power, zero leverage, and were moments away from being arrested in a strange city. They scrambled. Uncle Gabriel practically ran for the heavy glass door. Dad grabbed Mom's arm, pulling her away from the desk. The very last thing I saw was my mother's face. A twisted, agonizing mask of shock, humiliation, and bitter regret as the heavy door swung shut behind them, leaving them out in the cold rain. The adrenaline slowly, agonizingly began to drain from my body, leaving me with violently shaking hands and a hammering heart. I leaned heavily against the wooden reception desk, suddenly feeling exhausted. Dr. Lincoln turned to me, his stern expression softening into one of deep pride. "You handled that incredibly well, partner," he said quietly, emphasizing the title. I let out a long, shaky breath that I felt like I had been holding in my lungs for 25 years. "Thank you for stepping in, for everything. You earned your spot here, Joshua. Never let anyone, especially them, make you feel otherwise. Take the rest of the afternoon off. Go home and decompress. You won today." I took his advice. I grabbed my jacket and drove back to my apartment, the relentless Seattle rain washing over my windshield in sheets. The confrontation in the clinic had been terrifying, but as I sat in the quiet, undisturbed safety of my living room couch, a profound, sweeping sense of peace washed over my entire soul. The ghost of my miserable past had finally been exorcised. They had fired their absolute best shot, tried their hardest manipulation tactics, and it had completely, utterly missed. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. I had 2 final, critical pieces of business to take care of to permanently sever these ties. First, I dialed Wyatt's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice sounding incredibly nervous and high-pitched. "Hey, Josh. Look, man. You gave them my exact address," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. "Man, I had to," Wyatt pleaded defensively. "Your Uncle Gabriel called me crying on the phone. They said they were worried sick about you. They're your family, Josh. You have to understand, you can't just cut blood off like that." "I understand perfectly." I cut him off sharply, not letting him finish his pathetic excuse. "I understand that you value their toxic manipulation over my physical and mental safety. You broke my trust. Don't ever contact me again, Wyatt. Have a nice life." I hung up the phone and blocked his number before he could utter a single word in response. Cutting him out felt like attending a funeral for a friendship, but it was a necessary burial. Then I opened my text message app. I had 14 missed calls and a massive, unhinged barrage of texts from my mother. The messages ranged wildly in tone. Some were pathetic apologies. Some were begging for money to pay Caleb's lawyer, and others were furious, vitriolic insults about how I was a monster who was going to burn in hell for abandoning my brother's future. I didn't read them all. I didn't need to absorb their poison anymore. I tapped the text box, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, and typed one final, definitive message. "Joshua, you chose a high school football game over my life when I was bleeding in a hospital. You chose a Porsche over my savings. And now you have to choose how to dig yourselves out of the massive bankruptcy you created. Caleb is your problem, your golden child. Do not ever look for me again. If you show up at my clinic again, I will have you arrested." I hit send. I watched the little green bubble pop up on the screen. Then I went into my settings. I blocked her number. I blocked Dad's number. I blocked Caleb, Uncle Gabriel, and every single extended relative who tied me to that miserable, suffocating past. I set the phone face down on the coffee table. The silence in the apartment wasn't heavy or lonely like it had been in the hospital room. It was light. It was the sound of absolute freedom. An hour later, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. I didn't panic this time. I didn't feel the cold dread creeping up my spine. I knew exactly who it was. I walked over and opened the door to find Joseph and David standing in the brightly lit hallway. They were completely soaked from the rain, but they were grinning ear to ear, holding 2 massive boxes of pepperoni pizza and a 6-pack of cold craft beer. "We heard the Wicked Witch of the East blew through the lobby today and tried to cause a scene," Joseph grinned, shaking the water out of his hair. "We figured you might need some heavy carbs and alcohol to celebrate the victory." I smiled. It was a genuine, wide smile that actually reached my eyes, stretching the muscles in my face. I stepped aside to let them in. We sat on the floor of my living room, eating hot pizza straight out of the box, drinking cold beer, and laughing until our sides hurt about the absolute look of horror on my parents' faces when Dr. Lincoln dropped the partnership bomb. Sitting there, surrounded by people who respected me, who showed up for me without being asked, without demanding anything in return, I realized something incredibly important. The blood running through your veins does not make a family. Actions do. Loyalty does. Showing up when things get hard does. I had lost my biological parents, yes, but I hadn't become an orphan. I had finally, truly found my real family. A full year passed since that rainy afternoon when my parents and Uncle Gabriel were escorted out of my clinic lobby by the Seattle police. 365 days of absolute, unbroken silence from the people who had spent my entire life making me feel like an inconvenient burden. Healing, as many of you probably know, is never a perfectly straight line. There were definitely nights during those first few months where I would wake up in a cold sweat. My heart would be hammering against my ribs, and for a terrifying few seconds, I was convinced I was back in that sterile hospital room with the rigid breathing tube shoved down my throat. I would hear the phantom, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor echoing in the silence of my Seattle bedroom. I would feel the ghost of the agonizing pain from my ruptured appendix. But most of all, I would see the sheer, icy indifference on my mother's face as she casually buttoned her expensive coat to leave me behind for a high school football game. I had to work through a massive amount of complicated grief. It was incredibly strange, like mourning people who were still entirely alive and living just a few states away. I basically had to hold a silent funeral in my own heart for the parents I desperately deserved but never actually had. I spent hours sitting in a therapist's office, staring at a beige wall, talking through the deeply toxic dynamic of my family tree. We unpacked the harsh reality of how my parents had taken the money meant for my college fund. Money they often dangled over my head like a promised inheritance to keep me compliant, and casually drained it to buy Caleb his precious luxury car. My therapist helped me understand why Wyatt's betrayal had hurt me almost as much as my parents' abandonment. Wyatt had projected his own childhood trauma from his parents' incredibly bitter divorce onto my situation. He had decided that keeping a family together, no matter how abusive or broken it was more important than my physical and mental safety. He valued the illusion of blood ties over my reality. I had to process all of that betrayal. I had to dig out the poison by the roots so it wouldn't infect my new life. By the time my one-year anniversary in Seattle finally rolled around, my daily reality looked completely unrecognizable from the miserable existence I had left behind. I was no longer just the quiet, exhausted surgical assistant who picked up double shifts on holidays to make a meager salary while his family celebrated without him. Thanks to Dr. Lincoln recognizing my worth and handing me that incredible promotion, I was a junior partner. I was a respected business owner in a thriving, high-end veterinary practice. I had my own office with my name on the frosted glass door, my own surgical schedule, and most importantly, I had a community that actually valued my presence. To mark the exact anniversary of my arrival, my found family decided to throw a surprise gathering. It happened on a rainy Friday evening after the clinic had officially closed its doors to the public. I had been in the back recovery ward for over an hour, checking the vitals of a severely malnourished golden retriever we had just taken custody of after a long, drawn-out animal cruelty seizure. The dog was terrified of loud noises and sudden movements, but he trusted me. I sat on the floor of his kennel, feeding him small pieces of boiled chicken from my hand. As I finally locked his kennel and walked out into the main reception area, the overhead fluorescent lights suddenly flicked on. Surprise! I actually jumped backward, my hand flying to my chest in pure shock. Standing in the massive lobby were Joseph, David, Dr. Lincoln, Cameron, who had specifically flown in from my hometown just for the weekend, and about 15 other clinic staff members. The front reception desk was entirely covered in massive trays of catered Italian food, boxes of expensive pastries, and a large custom banner that read, "Happy 1 year of freedom, Joshua." Joseph walked over, grinning from ear to ear, and handed me a cold craft beer. He slapped me hard on the shoulder. We figured surviving a whole year with Dr. Lincoln as your daily mentor deserved some kind of massive, expensive award, but the pizza and pasta combo was way cheaper for the clinic budget. Dr. Lincoln chuckled, his deep voice carrying across the room. He raised a plastic cup in the air to get everyone's attention. The room immediately quieted down. Exactly 1 year ago, I drove a very stubborn, physically broken, and incredibly angry young man up the coast to this city, Dr. Lincoln said, his tone carrying a warm, serious resonance. He had just survived a major medical emergency that should have killed him. He had absolutely nothing to his name but a single duffel bag of clothes and a tremendous, undeniable amount of grit. Today, that exact same young man is an indispensable pillar of this hospital. He is a partner. He is a brilliant medical professional who handles the cases no one else wants to touch. But much more than that, he is family. To Joshua. To Joshua! The room echoed loudly. I looked around at their smiling, genuine faces. There was no hidden agenda here in this room. Nobody was keeping a secret tally of favors. Nobody was waiting for me to make a mistake so they could redirect the spotlight to someone else. They were just happy I was alive and standing there with them. I felt a tight, heavy knot form in my throat, but for the first time in my life, it was from overwhelming gratitude instead of unshed tears. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, looking directly at Dr. Lincoln and then at Cameron. I spent my entire life trying to earn a place at a dining room table where the chairs were always intentionally pulled away from me. You guys built an entirely new table and offered me a seat at the head of it without me even having to ask. I will never, ever forget that. The party lasted for hours. We ate incredible food. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, and we shared ridiculous, chaotic stories about difficult clients and stubborn animals. Nobody left early to go to a sports game. Nobody checked their phones to see if someone more important needed them. It was, without a single doubt, the best night of my adult life. 2 days later, on a quiet, slow Sunday morning, I experienced the final, defining moment of closure I didn't even know my soul was waiting for. Seattle was doing what Seattle does best. It was raining a slow, steady, gray drizzle. I was sitting in my favorite local independent coffee shop, located just a few blocks from my apartment building. I had a steaming mug of black coffee sitting in front of me and a thick veterinary medical journal open on the wooden table. The shop was nearly empty, perfectly quiet except for the hiss of the espresso machine and the low, murmuring voices coming from the television mounted high in the corner of the room. I wasn't paying any attention to the TV screen until I heard the name of my hometown explicitly mentioned by the sports anchor. I slowly lowered my medical journal and looked up. The sports channel was running a special syndicated weekend segment on high school athletic programs across the country and the difficult transitions young stars face moving into college sports. The camera panned slowly across a very familiar, freshly painted football field. It was the exact stadium where my parents had abandoned me to go sit in the bleachers while I was choking on a ventilator. The segment focused entirely on the massive fallout of the previous championship season. The reporter's serious voiceover explained that the local team's star quarterback had faced a major, career-ending setback. The screen quickly cut to a graphic showing police dashcam footage of a wrecked vehicle wrapped around a massive oak tree. It was Caleb's midnight blue Porsche. The front end was completely crushed like an empty soda can. The reporter detailed how a highly publicized drunk driving incident, combined with resisting arrest, had instantly cost the star athlete every single one of his Division I scholarship offers. Because of the severe legal trouble, the massive, astronomical fees paid to a high-profile criminal defense lawyer to keep him out of a county jail cell, and the absolute public relations nightmare he created, the major universities had completely pulled their recruitment offers. They didn't want the liability. Instead of playing on national television for a top-tier school with a full ride, Caleb had been forced to quietly enroll in a small, obscure community college 2 towns over, playing for a team that barely had a budget for matching uniforms. The camera then cut to a live, on-site interview taking place on the rusted metal bleachers of that small community college field. Sitting there, huddled miserably under a large golf umbrella to block the freezing rain, were my parents. Robert and Martha. I sat back in my chair and simply stared at the screen, my heart beating at a slow, steady, entirely calm pace. They looked terrible. My dad looked like he had aged 10 full years in a single 12-month span. His face was deeply lined with stress. His shoulders slumped heavily under the weight of whatever massive financial ruin they had brought upon themselves trying to save Caleb from the natural consequences of his own reckless actions. My mother's face was even worse. Her signature perfect hair was frizzy from the damp air. Her smile was incredibly tight, forced, and her eyes looked dark and hollow. The arrogant, untouchable, vicious aura they carried into my clinic lobby a year ago was entirely gone, replaced by pure exhaustion. The reporter, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, held the microphone out to my mother. "Martha, it has obviously been a very challenging, unexpected year for your family. Going from state champions with multiple D1 offers to dealing with legal hurdles and a totally different college athletic experience. How do you find the strength to keep showing up to these games in the rain?" My mother plastered on her signature brave face, lifting her chin and looking directly into the camera lens. "Well, family is absolutely everything to us. We stand by our son through thick and thin, no matter the challenges. Caleb is a spectacular athlete. He just made a tiny, youthful mistake. We are completely dedicated to his journey, no matter what it takes or how much it costs us." The reporter nodded sympathetically, completely buying the dedicated mother routine. "That is real, unwavering dedication. Do you have any other children who play sports? Or is it just the three of you navigating this difficult journey together?" There was a slight, almost imperceptible pause. My mother didn't even blink. Her expression remained completely fixed, a perfect mask of martyrdom. "We are just blessed with Caleb," she said smoothly, her voice not wavering for a single second. "He is our only focus. He is our entire world." She completely denied my existence on national television. She entirely erased 25 years of my life, my achievements, and my survival. A year ago, hearing those exact words might have broken me in half. It might have sent me spiraling into a deep, dark depression, wondering why I was so fundamentally unlovable, so defective, that my own mother would rather pretend she only gave birth to one child than admit I was out there thriving without her money or her permission. But sitting in that coffee shop, holding my warm ceramic mug, surrounded by the peaceful, steady rain of a city I had conquered on my own terms, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, sweeping sense of relief. She had finally spoken the truth out loud. I was no longer their son. I was completely, legally, physically, and emotionally free. The heavy, invisible chains of obligation, guilt, and the desperate search for their approval simply dissolved into thin air. They were permanently trapped in their own miserable cycle of enabling a destructive golden child. They were drowning in lawyer fees, suffocating under car debt, sitting in the freezing rain to watch a community college game that didn't matter, desperately pretending their lives hadn't fallen apart. I had my incredible clinic. I had my friends. I had my health. I had my dignity. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee. Tasted absolutely fantastic. I closed the heavy medical journal, packed it neatly into my leather messenger bag, and stood up from the table. I walked over to the front counter, dropped a generous $20 bill into the barista's glass tip jar, and pushed the heavy door open. The cool Seattle rain hit my face, washing away the last remnants of the past, and for the very first time in 25 years, I felt like I could truly breathe. When I look back on everything that happened, from the excruciating pain in my stomach to the moment I saw my parents on that television screen, I realized something that probably sounds completely crazy to anyone who hasn't lived through a similar nightmare. My appendix rupturing in the middle of a grueling double shift didn't ruin my life. It saved my life. If my body hadn't physically broken down that afternoon, if I hadn't been rushed into emergency surgery with my life hanging in the balance, I would have kept playing the exact same pathetic, compliant role I was assigned at birth. I would have kept working myself to the bone, silently handing over my hard-earned salary to cover family expenses, and watching them funnel my stolen college fund into Caleb's bottomless pit of endless needs. I would have kept sitting by my phone on Thanksgiving and Christmas, waiting for a dinner invitation that was never going to come. I would have spent my entire existence being nothing more than a convenient background character in the fictional story of Caleb's manufactured greatness. Lying in that hospital bed, suffocating around a plastic breathing tube while my parents literally walked out the door to go watch a football game, forced me to confront the absolute, undeniable, brutal reality of my situation. People will treat you exactly how you consistently allow them to treat you. My parents did not love me. They loved what my existence could do for them. They loved the convenience of my silence. They loved that I was an obedient, self-sufficient safety net they could exploit and rob whenever Caleb made a mess of his life. Walking away was the hardest, most terrifying thing I have ever done in my entire life. It required breaking every single societal rule we are constantly taught about unconditional family love. But the hard truth is, love should never, ever be unconditional when the conditions involve your own abuse, your neglect, and your financial exploitation. Blood is nothing more than a random biological coincidence. Sharing DNA does not give anyone, not even your mother or father, a free pass to treat you like garbage. To anyone watching this video right now who is currently bending over backward to please people who only look in your direction when they need money, a favor, or a scapegoat, stop. Stop setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm. You cannot heal your mind and your heart in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick in the first place. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged, unfair game is to completely walk off the field, leave the stadium behind, and build your own life somewhere else where the rules are based on mutual respect. I am 26 years old now. I am a junior partner at a highly successful veterinary hospital. I spend my days saving the lives of animals who cannot speak for themselves, using the skills I fought so hard to acquire. I have friends who show up for me on my worst days without ever asking for a favor or a loan in return. I have a life that is entirely, beautifully, and fiercely mine. And I didn't need a single drop of my parents' conditional approval or their stolen inheritance money to build it. The most profound, life-altering lesson I took away from this entire ordeal is understanding the deeply destructive nature of the golden child and scapegoat family dynamic. When parents aggressively and blindly favor one child over another, they are not just severely hurting the child they neglect. They are actively destroying the future of the child they spoil. By constantly shielding Caleb from the real-world consequences of his actions, by using my stolen money to fund his mistakes and paying a lawyer to erase his crimes, my parents created an adult who lacks accountability, resilience, and basic character. His reckless actions eventually cost him his bright future, and their blind devotion cost them their financial stability and the only son who actually cared about them. On the flip side, being the scapegoat forced me to develop an ironclad sense of independence. But the true victory was not just surviving their neglect. It was learning to establish absolute, unbreakable boundaries. Walking away from toxic family members is often heavily stigmatized in our society. We are constantly told by outsiders to forgive, to forget, to keep the peace for the sake of the family image. But true peace only comes when you fiercely protect your own mental and physical well-being. You have the fundamental human right to demand respect, and you have the ultimate power to permanently revoke access to your life if that respect is not given. You are the sole architect of your own chosen family. This is the moment where I turn it over to you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship to protect your own peace? Or did a specific part of my journey resonate with your own family experiences? Share your favorite takeaway or your own story in the comments below. Or simply drop the word good, so I know that this story brought some value, validation, and encouragement to your day. Your engagement and your stories mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for listening.